In today's show, the Mac grows twice as fast as the PC market, the spring Apple event date, Ross Displayman confirms dual cutouts for the iPhone 14, 14-inch M2 MacBooks, a new setup tour, Apple free news, and iMac M1 versus MacBook Pro. I'm Dave, and I'll simplify Apple so that everything just works for you. And if you want the latest Apple news, leaks and rumours every weekday at 1300 UTC, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell. And first story today, the Mac is growing way faster than the PC market, with 341 million Macs shipped in 2021, growing 28.3% versus 14.6% for the PC market. So Apple Silicon is making a big difference here, and these are quite bonkers numbers in terms of Macs. Mac has always been quite a small segment of the PC market. It still is, but it's growing, and if the rest of the market is growing at 14%, that means Apple is gaining market share. And that's important, especially if we want to get developers looking at Apple devices as a genuine platform that is worth them developing their games for. Next up, Bryan Data has asked, and iCave answers, what is your best guess for the date for the spring event? Now, the date that I've got in mind is March the 15th. This is a Tuesday. It makes a lot of sense because then if they want to put out ordering beginning on the Friday for whatever products are released and then shipping the following Friday, then they still fall within March, which means they're within that quarter of the year, which for accounting reasons makes a lot of sense for Apple. Now, what are the products that we're likely to see? Now, one of the most expected products, I suppose, is the iMac with at least M1 Pro and M1 Max, but potentially looking to get the dual M1 Pro and M1 Max chips in there. This is going to be our 27-inch form factor, and maybe there might just be a chance of a larger one too. That would be maybe between 30 and 32 inches, and as I mentioned in a previous show this week, I think that although Ross Displayman has said that we're going to be getting the 27-inch form factor, he's also said that they're working on a 32-inch panel, which was presumably for a Pro Display XDR style of device. What if that is actually the Pro Max iMac, and then we're going to get a Pro iMac in the middle and then the regular iMac at the bottom? Who knows? But what else are we looking to see? We're probably going to see the new Mac Mini, again with those Pro chips inside, the same as the MacBook Pros that we've had, the M1 Pro and the M1 Max with the different sized GPUs. And again, this is looking at getting a redesign. This is the one that John Prosser and company leaked quite a while ago, with Ian's Elbow doing the renders for this. So these renders that you can see on screen right now, these are from Apple Tomorrow, who is our render artist of choice, although Ian is a great guy as well. Thanks to him for coming on the iCaversary last year. Already starting to plan what we're going to do for this year's iCaversary as well. But in addition to those desktop Macs, we are also potentially expecting to see the MacBook Air with M2 inside. Now, the M2 is going to be based on the A15 cores, as far as we know, with 4 performance cores and 4 efficiency cores and 10 GPU cores, plus that redesign. So that's losing the wedge shape, going to a flatter design across the board, adding MagSafe in there, keeping the 2 USB-C ports, keeping the headphone jack, which presumably will also be able to do what the MacBook Pros can do, and more power-hungry headphones with higher impedance. Those tend to be a more audiophile style of things. And of course, there's also the potential for seeing the iPhone SE 3rd generation. That's almost a certainty at this point. A15 inside, 5G, probably adding MagSafe as well, I would guess, and potentially the M2 iPad Pros as well. That would be a really nice thing to see, especially if the mini LED XDR displays also start to come to the 11-inch and potentially get the improved reduction in blooming that we've seen on the MacBook Pro models, potentially with different filtering between the display and the backlights. Next up, Evan Rogers asks, Ross Displayman confirmed the new notchless iPhone design. What do you think of the hole punch plus pill design? Honestly, I really don't know why everyone is so excited about getting rid of the notch when you're just going to put the same stuff there, but with a little gap above it. What are you going to do with these extra 4 pixels? I don't understand why everyone's so excited. Does it look better? Sure. I don't think it's going to make any difference to anyone, really. I think there's still a lot of stuff that you need to have at the top of that phone, and if you're going to fill it all up with stuff anyway, you might as well just have a block instead of two small blocks with dead space above it that you can't do anything with. It's a purely aesthetic thing. If you like the way it looks, fine. Shail Al London asks, do you think we'll be seeing a 14-inch M2 MacBook non-Pro or Air? And this is a tricky one. I don't see that Apple will do a MacBook and a MacBook Air. I think we're going to go MacBook Pro and MacBook Air still, most likely. Though I wouldn't be opposed to having a third category in the MacBook lineup, because we've got 3 in the desktops. We've got the iMacs, we've got the Mac Pros, and the Mac Minis. So I certainly wouldn't be opposed to it. I think the chances are we're either going to see the 13-inch MacBook Air go up to a 14-inch. So we'd have a 14 and a 16, potentially, if they were to do a larger MacBook Air. I'm still not convinced on that one. But if they were going to do the 2 sizes, that would make sense, because you can get that into the same chassis. Or a 13-inch going into a smaller chassis with the thinner bezels as well, more like the old MacBook itself. I think it makes sense to keep the dimensions the same between the Air and the Pro. In terms of the screen dimensions, I don't know if there's any sort of binning that can happen between the 120Hz ProMotion displays and 60Hz only displays, if there could be an issue that would allow them to bin those down, in which case it would make a lot of sense in terms of economies of scale. But otherwise, I actually think the 13-inch display size is a pretty good size for the Air. You want it to be more mobile. It would be better to have a smaller chassis, I think, than a bigger display in the same size chassis. Hopefully that makes sense. Yuri Tech asks, iCave Answers, will there be a new 2022 separate setup tour video? Sure, we can do that. It's not going to be right now, but we can do it over the next week or so, probably, if we have a quiet day next week. Brandon L asks, iCave Answers, do you have plans to talk about non-Apple news during slow news periods? There's always news from other tech companies, and there will likely be a lot of EV news this year. Also, you could always introduce yourself as ICDHD, iCave Dave HD, such as another YouTuber does. It's an interesting idea, but honestly, I certainly wouldn't be talking about like Android phones, because they just don't interest me at all. EVs I'm more interested in than Androids and PC stuff, although I watch a bit of Linus Tech Tips to try and keep my ear to the ground on interesting stuff that might actually affect Apple. But EVs, I don't have any real expertise in. I'm interested in them. I definitely want a Cybertruck, but at the moment I just don't have any sort of new information. I don't have an interesting take on them, so I don't think I will at the moment. But if something comes up that's super interesting, or like when the Cybertrucks finally arrive, maybe. You never know. Thomas Rabenstein asks, iCave Answers, I am still undecided. Should I wait for the upcoming iMac to replace my desktop Mac, or should I buy a new MacBook with M1 Max? A MacBook Pro would give me more flexibility in terms of mobility, as you could also use it as a desktop replacement with an external monitor. In general, for daily and heavy use, 3D rendering, is there anything wrong with using a MacBook Pro for the desktop as well? Are there any disadvantages that I have overlooked? You can absolutely use it as a desktop replacement. There's a lot of people that will carry their MacBook to work, for example, dock it to a display and keyboard and mouse on the desk, use that all day long, and then take their MacBook home with them, so that if they need to do anything on the MacBook, they can do it, and if they don't, it's just something they can use as a desktop. But it does give that flexibility, you're right. What it does lack in those terms is you will get less performance in terms of thermals from any kind of MacBook form factor compared to most desktops. Apple doesn't have the constraints in terms of power usage, and it can ramp up the fans a lot quicker, and they can use bigger fans which might be quieter, things like that. So there is a little bit of a trade-off. There's also the price difference. If you're getting a MacBook Pro versus a iMac, you're going to get a much bigger screen on an iMac for the same spend. So that's something to consider. And if you're going for a Mac Mini, for example, you can have as big of a display as you want. I've gone 40 inches, and that was like £250. Like, that's not an expensive display. So For the amount of size and the amount of real estate, with it being 4K, there's definitely a trade-off there, but the MacBook Pro displays are beautiful, so are the iMac ones. This one, less beautiful, very functional. But I would definitely say in terms of performance, the biggest difference is going to be thermals. If you've got a good way of keeping your laptop cool, especially if you're using it in like a clamshell mode, then that could be absolutely fine, but just make sure that that's not going to be something that throttles the workflows that you're doing. And that will do us for today's show, guys. Hopefully we are going to get some more news soon. At the moment, it's just great that I get to answer these questions for you. Thanks to all the Patreons over here, and let me know in the comments if you've already ordered anything from our Cupertino range. See you in the next one.